Good morning. You guys come on into the Puddin Creek Rod Shop. Let's get the day started together. Do all hot rodders find old junk and then drag it home and hang it up on the shop wall? Or is that just me? I found this old oil change reminder inside a Model A coupe. They took the Model A to a DeSoto dealership to get the oil changed. I thought that was pretty cool. I might be the only one that thinks that's pretty cool. I got this print showing Sam Barris chopping the actual first Mercury that ever got chopped. I thought that was pretty cool. I got it from a local hot rodder. And the really cool thing about it is he had Sam Barris's son sign it for him. I don't know what that's worth. Probably about the same amount as the yard sale frame it's mounted in. They say it's not called hoarding, it's called collecting. If the stuff you're collecting is cool stuff. That's what I tell the little woman anyway. Now you're saying, hey Puddin Creek, why is there a skill saw in the middle of a hot rod shop? Well, this week I had to do a little work on the little woman's coupe. Yeah, I know, that's not the kind of coupe you were interested in seeing me work on. Trust me, that's not the one I was interested in working on either. Here's the remnants of yesterday afternoon's coffee break, an 80s Street Rodder magazine, and about a full cup of coffee. That's not what we're going to talk about today. What we're going to talk about today is this unique item right up here on the old shelf. Now, if you know what this is, start typing in the comments right now. I can see the guesses already. 1950s Buck Rogers ray gun with mason jar for moonshine. Well, the mason jar is to hold something strong, but not moonshine. It has nothing to do with Buck Rogers, although it does have that rocket look from the 1950s. But it is from the 1950s, so if you guess that, you're partially right. You see, when I was a young man, I was talking to this old guy, and he was telling me about when he was a teenager in the 1950s, he built a hot rod right in his mother's driveway. And he painted the hot rod with a vacuum cleaner. Yeah, you heard me right, a vacuum cleaner. Now, when I heard that story as a young man, I thought this old guy is really full of it. But I've since learned that vacuum cleaner paint jobs were actually a thing. Evidently, back in the day, all the big major brands of vacuum cleaners came with a painting attachment. Kirby had an attachment, Rainbow had an attachment, and Electrolux had a painting attachment. You would just move the hose from the intake side that your mother used to vacuum the house with and plug it into the output side of the vacuum cleaner, and bam, you got yourself an air source for your paint gun. Now, evidently, this method was used so often that it gained a nickname. The old hot rodders called it an Electrolux paint job. One of the most famous cars to be painted this way is the Bob Johnston Tweety Pie tea bucket. You see, Bob Johnston built this thing in the mid-50s, and they sprayed the paint with a vacuum cleaner in his garage. They applied 40 coats of lacquer. Now, I think that might be the key right there to this vacuum cleaner paint job deal, is lacquer paint. All you old hot rodders already know, but for the young guys watching the channel, lacquer paint sprays a lot like primer. It dries really fast, and it dries kind of flat, doesn't run quite as bad as enamel paint, and it has to be color sanded and buffed out for a shine. So it's a little bit forgiving for painting outside or in a garage or not having a paint booth, and I imagine it kind of helps on using a vacuum cleaner to paint too. Now, just for a minute, let me take you back to 2022. The little woman and I were in Daytona for the turkey run. We like to go to the turkey run to see all the craziness that happens when thousands of hot rodders descend on the city of Daytona. But the main reason we like to go is for the swap meet. The turkey run has one crazy swap meet. So I'm slowly, meticulously working my way through all the aisles of the swap meet, digging in boxes, looking for buried treasure, when I come upon this milk crate with this item right down inside of it. As I reach to pick it up, the seller says, "I bet you have no idea what that is." And I reply, "A painting attachment for a Rainbow vacuum cleaner?" And he says, "Yeah, that's what it is." I said, "Well, how much?" He said, $3. I said, "For $3, I'll take it for a conversation piece. I can set it in my shop and give all my hot rod buddies a good ear beating on it whenever they come to visit." All right, back to today. Just because I've had too much coffee this morning and I'm tired of working on the little woman's chicken coop, we're going to try this attachment out. We're going to find out today, one way or another, can you really paint with a vacuum cleaner? Now, this thing's just been sitting on the shelf for 2 years. I've never tried it. I've never had thinner in it. Today's the first time I've ever poured anything in this jar. We're going to find out together whether this is a good painting attachment or a dud or a joke. We'll find out together. Now, I don't happen to have a 1950s Electrolux vacuum cleaner laying around, so we're going to have to use my Lowe's Shop Vac and try that for a test. I mash the button, nothing happens, nothing's coming out. I try opening up the flow adjustment, still nothing works. I'm thinking this is probably a dud. All of a sudden I get a little spray. All right, it's spraying good. I'm kind of amazed. This thing actually sprays, and a nice long stream too, with paint thinner. So I would say that's a pass on the first test. Now on to the second test. If you remember, I said earlier, I think probably the secret to painting Tweety Pie and all the other Electrolux paint jobs was using lacquer paint. Lacquer paint, I would think, would be just a lot more forgiving when you're trying to paint a car with a vacuum cleaner. When I said that earlier, you were thinking, I wonder where old Puddin' Creek's going to find any lacquer paint. They haven't made that in years. Well, your old buddy Puddin' Creek has been collecting up lacquer paint for years. So I've got a really good collection of a lot of different colors of good, usable lacquer paint. Now, some of these I'm saving for a project, like this gallon of British Racing Green. That would look good on a hot rod. Or this old Arco gallon of maroon. So I don't want to use any of those. Let's pick something that I'm not saving for anything. How about this old Ditzler lacquer right here? Somebody must have used this one back in the day to touch up Mike's MG. Well, I don't know Mike, and I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be working on his MG, so we could waste this pint of paint right here. I shook it up for about 5 minutes. I didn't video that. I know you guys don't want to watch me shaking paint. I've never had this can open. I'm as anxious as you guys are to see what color this is. Obviously, it's red. Hey, Mike's MG was almost lipstick red. I kind of like it. That's a cool color. Now I'm wondering, should I waste this paint? Well, we're not going to waste much. We just need a little dab for a test, a little bit of paint, a lot of lacquer thinner. This paint smells amazing. I can't really describe what this old lacquer paint smells like. I wish you could be here to smell it with me. It smells like the 1970s. An old-time paint guy told me when I was young, don't hammer your lid back on your paint cans. Just push them down with your thumbs, and that way you don't beat everything up and distort it. And you're saying, but the guy that works behind the counter in the paint department at Lowe's, he takes a big soft head hammer and beats the crap out of the cans when he shuts them. And I'm saying, you're going to model your life after the guy working behind the paint counter at Lowe's? Now, it's about this time you're saying, hey, Puddin' Creek, where's your paint mixing cup? with all the ratios marked off on the side of it. Well, I have some of those, but to be honest with you, I don't really know what the paint mix ratio is when you're shooting paint with a 1950s Rainbow vacuum cleaner attachment powered by Lowe's Shop Vac. If you know that ratio, leave it in the comments for me. For Christmas this year, I'm going to try to find a little woman some perfume that smells as good as this 1970s lacquer paint. I actually have absolutely no idea what the thickness is supposed to be to paint with a vacuum cleaner, but we're going to give this a try. This will be our first test. If this doesn't work, we'll come back and thin it down some more or thicken it up, whatever it needs. Now, I'm going into this assuming it's going to be a complete disaster. I'm guessing either it's just going to spit out globs of paint and make a huge mess, or it's going to spit out a bunch of runs and make a huge mess. So I didn't want to waste anything good on this first test. I started to get a piece of good sheet metal and spray that, but I hate to even waste a piece of sheet metal on this. So I went back in the junkyard and I found this old 40 Merc bumper that's bent, rusted, and pitted, but somebody back in the day has sandblasted it and primered it. Looks like maybe in 1962. So let's try that. Now, with spraying the paint thinner good, but it doesn't want to pick up this paint, so I may have it way too thick. And the hose doesn't want to stay in. Obviously, this is not the right vacuum cleaner for this spray attachment. I keep adjusting the flow knob, and finally I see a little red paint. There's only the one knob, so there's no way to dial in a spray pattern, so let's just give it a try and go. My immediate thoughts are it's actually spraying pretty good. I'm kind of amazed. I don't see any runs, but let's keep going. One thing I noticed is it's not sucking up enough paint. I think just because I didn't mix enough up in the jar. The suction tube sits really high in the jar. It doesn't get down to the bottom. So I'm going to need to mix up some more paint to even finish this test. Well, this is nothing like I expected. I don't see any runs. I don't see any globs. It's actually spraying great. All right, I mixed up some more paint, so let's give it another try. With the spray button on top, your natural inclination is to hold this thing like an airbrush or a touch-up gun with one hand, but the vacuum cleaner hose keeps falling out the backside, so I have to hold the hose in with the left hand and operate the spray button with the right hand, which makes it really awkward. It's like you're painting with a fire hose. Every time I change positions with it, the vacuum hose wants to fall out. If the hose actually fit the attachment, it would be a pleasure to use. So what's it like spray painting with a vacuum cleaner? Well, it's nothing like a paint gun. You know how with a paint gun you spray and you have to get the right velocity and flow right, so the paint kind of shoots out and smacks the car, and you hope that it smacks it just right so that it sticks and it doesn't run, or it sticks and it doesn't have too much orange peel. Well, this is nothing like that. This is more akin to using a powder coating gun. This kind of just puffs the paint out and it lands on the part you're painting. All right, let's flip this bumper over and get close to it and just see what we ended up with. Now remember, all that rough surface you're seeing is because this was a rusty old pitted bumper before it was sandblasted, so just ignore that. What I'm looking for are runs. I don't see any runs at all. I'm looking for globs of paint that it spit out. I don't see any globs of paint at all. I would say that this thing did an amazing job. Now, I had meant for this to be the end of the video, but I really felt bad leaving you guys with only having painted an old pitted, rusted bumper. I know that wasn't much of a test. So I had some free time the next afternoon, and I thought, let's paint something cool. Let's paint something smooth so we can actually give this a real test and see if we can come out with any kind of a smooth paint job. So let's pick a different color for this test, just to keep things interesting. I know I said I was saving this British Racing Green for a big project, but 1 gallon of paint's not going to paint a whole car anyway, and I'm just dying to see what this stuff looks like. I've never had this can open. It's probably been sealed up for decades. Let's pop it open and see what we've got here. I've seen cars that were painted British Racing Green, not in person, but in magazines. I've always liked the color. I thought it was a really cool color, but I've never seen any live. So this will be the first time actually having seen this color live and in person. Well, that's not exactly what I was thinking. In the magazines, British Racing Green looks a lot darker. Well, it looks like a lot of our colors in the bottom of the can. Like I say, this can's probably not been open for decades. So let's get this stirred up and see what it looks like after that. I think it's finally stirred up good. It looks pretty consistent now. Let me strain it into a jar and let's get some thinner in it. Let's start spraying something cool. I'm anxious to show you guys what we're going to spray. So earlier today, I was looking around the shop for something cool to spray for you guys, something a lot cooler than that old bent-up Mercury bumper. And I thought about what I had hanging on the wall, a 32 Ford grill shell. It doesn't get much cooler than that. It's not an original one. It's a Brookville or a United Pacific repop, but it is a steel grill shell. And it had already been primered, so I just wiped it down with some wax and grease remover, and now we're ready to get the party started. I can tell right off the bat that this paint's still too thick, so let me run back in the shop and thin it down some more. So I added some more lacquer thinner. Let's give it another little test spray. Oh, that's looking a lot better. All right, let's sling some lacquer. So as you're watching this video, you're probably kicked back in your big recliner. Your wife probably just brought you a glass of iced tea. And she probably said, "Darling, what are you watching on TV?" And you said, "I'm watching Old Puddin' Creek paint a 1932 Ford grill shell with a vacuum cleaner." And she says to you, "Boy, hot rodding sure is a weird hobby. Did you ever think about taking up fishing or golf or something?" It's spraying good, but honestly, it's not spraying as good as the red paint was yesterday. I don't know if this is just a difference in the two paints, or I may have it a little bit thick still. It probably needed a little bit more thinner. As I'm spraying this grill shell, I'm thinking about the Tweety Pie tea bucket, and I'm thinking about the 40 coats of Royal Triton purple lacquer that they sprayed on it in the 1950s. And I'm thinking to do a whole car, even if it was just a tea bucket, that would take some time to lay down 40 coats with a vacuum cleaner. Now, because we're just doing a little experiment or demonstration, I'm not going to lay 40 coats of paint on this grill shell. I'm only going to lay 3 coats on it. Now, I know 3 coats is nowhere near enough, but we're not making show car parts here. We're just trying to figure out how hard it really was to paint a car with a vacuum cleaner in the 1950s. Well, here's a finished product. Looks like we've already had a varmint land in the paint, but that's about right for painting outside. But that's just the way it would have happened if a kid in high school in the 1950s was painting his car out in his driveway while his mom and dad was going on a weekend trip so he could use the vacuum cleaner and not get wrote up for it. As you can see, it came out rough as a night in jail, but no runs. Now, when I painted this outside yesterday, it was dry to the touch in about 15 minutes, maybe even 10 minutes. A matter of fact, it was dry enough so fast that bug that landed in it didn't even leave a mark. Now, to continue our little experiment, I'm going to block sand this one side using some 1000 grit sandpaper and some water with a few drops of Dawn dishwashing detergent mixed in. And I'm just going to take it down and try to level the roughness out. You're saying, "Hey, Puddin' Creek, you only put 3 coats of paint on that. You know you're going to burn right through the paint before you ever get it leveled out." I'm aware of that. This is just an experiment. I fully well expect to see some primer showing through before we're done here, but I just want to see how much it takes to level out that really, really rough surface. Now, I sped this up so you guys don't fall asleep on me out there in video land, but in real time, I sanded on this side for about 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, it's getting pretty level. All that rough feeling is completely gone by just rubbing your hand over it. As you can see, I have burnt through the paint, and there is some primer showing, just like we discussed before. It's not completely level, it's not completely flat, but it's pretty close. Now, even though it's not perfectly flat, let's take some Meguiar's number 7 and just do a little hand rubbing on this lacquer and just see what it looks like once you bring the shine out in it. All right, let's see what we got. Here's the way it looked just as sprayed with the vacuum cleaner. Here it is after we color sanded it. And there it is with just a little bit of hand rubbing. So I would think, yes, my final conclusion is absolutely you could paint a car with a vacuum cleaner. If I were actually painting a car, I would do some spray outs and refine that mix. I think it needs to be a little thinner, and then it wouldn't be so rough to start with. Also, I would lay down a lot of coats and some sanding in between every 10 coats or so to have some build up to work with. If you just go slow and take your time, I think it's completely doable. I see how they painted Tweety Pie now. Well, that completes the experiment. Now for the junk portion of our video. If you like junk, stay tuned. If you don't like junk, we'll see you next week. The little woman and I stopped off at an estate sale of a gentleman that died that was supposed to have had a lot of old tools. So we'll kind of show you what we got there if you're interested. Here's the first box of stuff we got. We paid $50 for everything in this box. I figure this old 10-type decimal chart's worth more than $50. Those usually sell for about $100 or $125. So I know I got a good deal on this box. This was a unique estate sale because this guy had bought every kind of woodworking and mechanics tool and automotive tool and electrical tool that you could imagine. But all these tools seemed to be 60s, 70s, and maybe a little bit of 80s. And it seemed like he just stopped buying any kind of tools in the 80s. There was no Harbor Freight. There was no made in China stuff whatsoever. So I don't know if the guy just got sick and couldn't work anymore or what happened. I always grab up any kind of an old oil can at any estate sale we go to. You'd really be surprised what those are worth. Everything I'm showing you is contents of that $50 box. Looks like the tapered reamer came from Ace Hardware. Looked like this little can he bought at White's. This can of paraffin oil was very unique. It almost looks like a military label. I haven't ever seen one of these before. Leave me a note in the comments if you have. Looks like he paid 69 cents for it. I wonder what year that was. Alamite number 4 wheel bearing grease. That can's got to be pretty old, and it's still full of grease. Pretty cool little Craftsman tape measure. I've never seen one with a view window like that. Tough Boy. That one's really ornate. I've never seen one like that either. That's got to be pretty old. That's an awful shiny tape. You wouldn't want to be framing houses and trying to use that one out in the sun. I always grab these old Dremel tools when I see them. I use them in the shop all the time. This one's made in USA. These old made in USA Dremel tools almost sound like a dental instrument. They're a whole different deal than the new Chinese ones. How about this old meter? That just screams 1970s, maybe 1980s. I'm sure this was made in USA. The old guys always kept everything in the original package and kept the original paperwork right there in the box with it. I'd bet you $90 it still works perfectly. How are you liking my $50 box of estate sale finds so far? Need to put new grommets in a canvas tarpaulin or a tent? Well, there's the kit to do it with. There's the punch and the die to form them. There looks like a bag of grommets in there with it. There's the wood block, and even a punch to punch a new hole in the canvas tarp. And I'm guessing every piece of it was made right here in the good old US of A. Another very old tape measure. This time it's a Lufkin. Lufkin was really a high-quality maker of all kinds of measuring tools. They made tape measures and hardware-type tools, but he also made a lot of machinist measuring tools. And I guess the last thing in this box is the Williams & Company decimal chart, or drill chart we call them, made in Reading, Pennsylvania. That's pretty cool. What year do you think that was made? No, wait, there's a couple more things. I lied to you. Down at the bottom of the box is the sun timing light. I'm sure that still works. And a Peerless battery cell tester. This is pretty cool. This cell tester looks brand new. It literally looks like it's never been out of this box. I'm sure the guy used it to test a battery, but he must have not used it to test too many batteries. All right, that's all for box number 1. That was the $50 box. Now let's move on to box number 2. Box number 2 I only paid $15 for. So now let's see what's behind door number 2. I mean box number 2. American-made steering wheel puller. I'll throw my Harbor Freight one in the nearest ravine. Siliconized cloth. I think Sears and Roebuck sold just about everything back in the day. Everything from a Band-Aid to a battleship. I've never even heard of siliconized cloth. If you guys have used this before, tell us about it in the comments. It was only 79 cents and it came in a metal case. You would think the metal case would be more than 79 cents. Next thing out of the $15 box is this wheel puller. And it's a Blackhawk brand. That's pretty good. I would say the wheel puller's worth 15 bucks on its own. Again, I'll throw out my Harbor Freight one over the nearest ravine. Vacuum gauge, made in USA. I'm in. SK brand, more good made in USA tools out of the $15 box. Craftsman brand. Ain't it pretty wild that back in the 70s, the Craftsman stuff was really just homeowner stuff. It wasn't industrial grade or mechanic grade, but it was really high quality stuff for what it was. There was a whole shelf full of these Dorman hardware kits, just cotter pins and lock washers and odds and ends, but I'm thinking they're all made in USA, so they're probably better than anything you can buy today. So I grabbed them all, threw them in the $15 box. Old Sears, made in USA seat webbing. I use this stuff all the time. Every time we build a new seat bottom for one of the hot rods to get you lowered down in it, I always start with a piece of plywood and I use this seat webbing to make the seat bottom. So this will actually absolutely go into a hot rod, both of these rolls. So that's it for the $15 box. So I got everything that I showed you in both boxes for 65 bucks. You can let me know in the comments if you think I got a good deal or if I'm just wasting time. Well, that's our show for this week. We hope you guys enjoyed it. We appreciate you staying to the end. Next week, we'll probably have something more serious for you. This was just kind of a fun one. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, tell your friends about Puddin Creek Rod Shop. We'll see you next week, Monday at 6 o'clock.